Hi there, well, welcome back to another Business Insight webinar with the Auckland Business Chamber that we run every week. And I'm delighted this week to have with us Dr. Kumar Laxman, who's a former professor, associate professor at the University of Auckland with specialisation in organisational and learning development, amongst a few other things. And he's going to talk to us about how all of this works and strategies around staff and professional development for SMEs today. I think you're going to find it a very helpful, very useful, a very interesting presentation. So Kumar, it's great to have you with us. We really look forward to hearing from you, and then obviously I'll ask a few, hopefully not too stupid questions at the end.
All right. Thanks, Simon. Okay, I hope you can see my slides. All right, so today I'm going to just share some insights and trends on the strategies that work that you can embed in your organization as an SME to turn your SME into a learning organization where there's continual learning and there's a culture of continual learning and development for your staff and for better business impact. So that's me. I used to be, as Simon said, a professor at Auckland Uni. My PhD is in learning and development, and I used to teach and do research on the various aspects of this topic. So, all right. So the first question that probably some of y'all might be asking is, why in the first place should you invest in training and development? Why is it important? Even if you have a small pool of staff, still investing in their continuous learning and development is critical. Why would that be so is for the following couple of reasons. Firstly, because you are investing in developing your people's capabilities, and that is important because when people's capabilities are developed, then your business grows in tandem. Secondly, because you need to attract and retain talent, and for you to retain the right talent, the talent that contributes to the growth of your SME, you would need to invest in their continual development of competency, skills, and knowledge. It is a good way to motivate and engage employees, because then they will know that you're not just employing them as an employee, but that you are invested in their growth and development. It creates an appreciative workplace culture where you are not just seen as just another staff, but as a valuable partner in the business growth. And lastly, you will build an employer brand name as somebody who cares about your employees, who is invested in the continual development of your employees. So these are the couple of reasons that you should actually invest in training and development. Even if you have a small pool of staff, it is important that you come up with some sort of a plan, which I'll explain in the next couple of slides, as to how you can look at what would be their capabilities and how do you upscale and develop them. All right, so the first step, I mean, I'm going to run through a bit of a stepwise, in a bit of a systematic manner, in which how you can create and implement learning and development programs and plans for your SME. You may not need all of these things, because each one of you all probably will be at different steps of this journey, but usually the first step is to do what is called as a needs analysis. Sometimes it's called as a training needs analysis. This is basically what it refers to is basically looking at what would be your desired state of business performance for your SME in according with your business goals and where you are right now. And then based upon that, you identify the gap. It's also called sometimes gaps analysis. And this is based on data. So that means it could be based on documents, it could be based on interviews, could be based on staff surveys, quite a lot of different ways in which you can collect data and triangulate your findings. But the main goal is actually to find what would be the gaps between your actual and or your current and your desired state of business excellence and performance. And then once you have found the gap, then the data will give you good insights on what are the causes of those gaps. And that could be due to a variety of reasons. It could be due to HR policies. It could be due to maybe a lack of leadership skills on the part of management. One of the possible causes, as I've found, could be because there is a gap in terms of staff competency skills. So you would need to look into how is it that I can upgrade and upscale their skills in accordance with the business goals and to improve organizational performance. So if the gap in performance is due to training needs, then it basically becomes a training needs analysis. If it is not, then you would need to find the other causes and then rectify. So I'm going to be speaking on the basis that your gap has been analyzed and is attributed to the fact that there is a gap in terms of employee skills and competencies. So what would be the contextual factors influencing this gap? And as I said, there could be a lot of different factors, and training could be one of the solutions if it is due to a gap in employee competencies and skills. So if that is the case, then you would need to look at what would be the knowledge, what would be the skills that need to be covered in training, how would you carry out the training, which are the best ways in which you can embed training. And training can be done in a lot of different ways, on the job, off the job, in a lot of different ways, which I will cover in the subsequent slides. So then that becomes a training focus to upscale skills and competencies of your employees and staff. All right, so if you have found a lack of skills as the cause, and you are now going to embark on looking at how is it that I can upscale my employee skills, one of the next things you would need to do is you need to develop some kind of a framework. How detailed it can be or how much of granular details go into it really depends on how much you want. But basically, the framework is a sort of a blueprint, you may say, or a sort of a plan in how you can go about planning for the trainings and all in a more structured and in an effective manner. All right, so some of the things, as I said, there could be a lot of things. I've seen different kinds of frameworks, so there's no one standard template for it. It all really depends on your needs and how much of a focus you want to put into it. But generally, in a framework, in an L&D framework, some of the things that you should be specifying would be what are your workforce's capabilities, skills, and competencies that you see as being desiring of effective or optimal performance. And then what would be some of the strategies that needs to be adopted so that you can go about achieving these goals, and your learning goals in that guide your learning strategies must be in alignment with your business goals. You may need to look at what does that mean in terms of manpower. Bigger organizations will have some dedicated staff who just focus on learning and development for their employees. As a smaller SME, that might not be possible, but there has to be somebody who has to take some charge of it. Could be part of the FT, or you could engage somebody from the outside, like I have been engaged before, in terms of creating this plan and moving it forward. And then some of the other things that usually are specified in a framework would be what are the resources that are needed. I mean, that will come about once you're clear on your learning goals and your learning strategies. Infrastructure, budget, etc. are some of the other things that you need to specify in your framework. And this becomes your guiding plan as you embark on and implement your program. Yes. So I very quickly want to look at what would be some of the principles of effective training as we know from decades of research, just just for your knowledge. It would be something that involves engagement. That means your learners, your trainees are engaged actively in the learning process. It's an active learning process, not a passive one where they're just merely just absorbing information that has been found not to be a very effective method of training delivery. The instructor and the student communications and interactions must be there for effective training. And between the trainees or the students, there has to be also, you need to factor in activities for their own communications and collaborations. You need to embed in real world problem solving tasks. You need to encourage active learner-centric learning, effective and prompt feedback, and have different customized ways of learning. All right, so these are quite across the board. If you look at research literature, are accepted as the effective principles of good training. And I'm just going to just briefly look at some of what would be considered as innovative or effective training strategies that are very commonly employed nowadays. Each one of these are quite big topics, but I'm just going to briefly touch on each one of them. The first would be problem-based learning. So this is where your training is centered around actually adaptive problem solving. So your participants or your trainees are actually actively involved in solving problems, and these problems are real world problems that mirror what would happen in your workplace or your workforce. So they're actually learning skills, learning knowledge, which can be applied in their workplace, in their business context. Case-based learning is very, very common as well, where your organization as a unit stores its knowledge of all the different cases that it has handled before. For example, I worked with a engineering consulting firm where they go about and they go to different clients and they do lots of troubleshooting of engineering problems. And so I worked with them in terms of developing their cases, which come together as a sort of like a knowledge repository. So when new employees come in, they may not get the opportunity to go out each time and get an opportunity to work in those kind of unique problem scenarios, but as part of their learning and development process, having a repository of different cases and asking them to look at it and solve the cases, and then then looking at possible solutions is the next best solution of actually simulating actual problem solving. And so that's another very commonly utilized strategy in learning and development. Simulations-based learning, again, is pretty popular, again, depending on what you do. For example, I worked with an electrical training company, and they have a lot of simulations where it could be a very safe environment for their trainees to actually try different strategies. And even if they fail, it's a safe environment. Whereas in the actual workforce, or if you're an apprentice, if you go out and you do something wrong, that could cause problems for your clients at the workplace, etc. Project-based learning, collaborative and team-based learning are pretty quite similar. This is where actually your learning engagement or the learning journey is where your staff are not learning just solo, individually. I mean, it's part of the whole concept of social learning. We human beings are social beings. So you try and make sure that the learning journey is something where they work in teams. If they're doing problem solving or if they are looking at different cases, they do it in teams, not just solo, because we know that working as a team, by and large, helps us to exchange ideas and get inspired by different perspectives and things like that. So that's just something I wanted to share. What would be some of the actual L&D strategies you can leverage on for your SME, particularly given that you are a small, most probably you would be a small organization with a smaller staff force? One would be on-the-job training. I've seen this being done quite often, where there's a lot of, these are strategies which you need to consciously or in a focused manner, you've got to make it happen, and not that it just happens by accident. Sometimes it happens, but you need to have a proper sort of a plan. So on the job training, where there's mentoring and coaching, so newer employees or employees with a lesser set of skills are consciously paired up with mentored by more senior employees, so that they learn skills. And one of the good things about on-the-job training is that you don't need to take your staff off work time to go and learn something separately or go for training programs that may take them off their job. So this is on-the-job training, but it needs to be consciously be planned, such that you're paired with different people and that you're coached. Using real-world problems or cases to support learning. As I mentioned, the example of the engineering consulting company. So they, they locked in, they wrote down all the different cases of all the, all the work that they've done with their consultants, and so that was turned into cases where, during their learning and development time, which they put aside for staff, staff would be looking at some of these cases and they will try and solve it on their own before the experts who actually solve the problems would come in and share what was done. And then, it really leads to a lot of very good discussions. Customized training, you need to have something which is as far as possible, particularly if you're an SME, you will have a smaller workforce. So you could customize training where it is catered to each of your employee, because they would be at different levels, different steps of the learning journey. So customized self-paced training is something important. Break your training into smaller chunks, not one whole large thing thrown at them, given that they are working full-time. It needs to be spread out. Offer short-term and long-term development plans, so they are very aware of expectations, and you need to monitor the progress, and if possible, offer some incentives for achieving the goals of either the short-term or the long-term plans. So these would be some of the things that you may want to consider in terms of embedding in a culture of continuous learning within your SME. The other thing that I want to talk about is harnessing the power of technology, basically online learning, because taking your staff off and, taking time might not work for many SMEs, because, time is of crunch and you want your staff to be fully engaged at work. So this is where the power of online learning, digital learning comes in. We know research says that the best ways of delivering training is actually through blended learning, which is a combination of face-to-face and digital training. But I have seen very often, face-to-face classroom training is sometimes very hard, especially for SMEs that, are in a constant crunch of time and hours. So then digital training is something that you would definitely might want to look at. It's not, you don't have to invest a lot of money into it. It can be done in very simple ways, or you could invest if you want to. So, the nice thing about digital training is that you could configure it depending on your budget and your needs. So the lovely thing about digital training is, as I mentioned, it's a safe environment like simulations, etc. If it's particularly something that would affect health and safety, for example, having some sort of a simulated digital environment of problem solving would be good for your staff to explore strategies that they might be quite scared to try in actual life, because that could endanger life. A lot of aviation companies do this. I've seen health and safety companies do this. So, that's one of the strengths of digital learning. And if you're looking at online learning, it could be something that could be done very simply in-house. There are lots of free tools out there that actually you can use. There are free learning management systems like Moodle, etc., which you can use to create very effective and yet simple training programs for your staff. So it's not like you need to invest in tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or if you have the budget, you could then buy their off-the-shelf programs, depending again, what are the programs you're looking at, what are the skill sets that you want your staff to acquire, and all of that. So that can be done. But I just want to put out that, harness the power of technology, which is growing obviously nowadays with AI and all. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do. All right, and the last bit that I want to cover would be evaluation. So you having designed and implemented a training, a learning and development framework or a program or a plan, is amazing, wonderful. You go about doing it, but you really need to evaluate. Simply why? Because has it worked for you? And evaluation is not something that you do just at the end, but it is something that you may want to do along the way. Simple evaluation, getting feedback from your staff, making some observations, along the way towards the end, if you have a formal, like a 6-month training program, or that is just so important. Evaluation is probably, in my opinion, more critical than designing and developing and implementing some sort of a learning and development plan, because it gives you insights about moving forward after that, in terms of refining the program, finding gaps, and things like that. So you could do it in simple ways yourself. As I said, observations, you could get some surveys, you could look at records. The other good thing about doing evaluation is that it would be, you would also get a good idea of your return of investment, because you would have put aside staff manpower, you would have invested some budget into it, and you want to make sure that that has actually translated into tangible gains. Obviously, the most tangible gain that most SMEs and organizations look at would be financial gains, in terms of has the L&D program improve your revenue, but that would not be the only aspect of your evaluation. There are many other aspects of the evaluation you would need to look at it. Your evaluation has to be very holistic. Some of the other things you may want to look at is, has it improved staff morale? Are staff feeling incentivized? And things like that, affective, cognitive, and behavioral domains, as we call it. So you're measuring it with evidence, and that gives you a very good understanding of the impact, and then that would allow you to look at your next steps. Should you carry with the same program? Should you refine the program? Should you do something else? It's quite important to do some evaluations. All right, so that's the end of my presentation, and that's just my contact details.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kumar. Yeah, there's a lot in that that I've taken out. I mean, I always think it's good to think about the why of this. I mean, the why, there's many reasons you put up on, I think, your first slide, but, really that performance aspect, but also morale and what it does for culture and so on. There's a lot there. I've just got a couple of questions, really. One is really just, in the processes and the frameworks and the ways of thinking about this that you've set out. Put some flesh on that for us. Give us an example or two, if you can think of them. And I'm putting you on the spot. You didn't know I was going to ask this, but an example or two from the world of business of where, you've seen learning and developing done well, and what it's meant for that business or businesses.
So, I mean, let me just go back into the case study of this engineering company that I worked with. So they've got about 10 staff, a combination of senior experienced consultants and a couple of newer consultants, and they never had any sort of L&D framework or anything at all. But they wanted to, improve particularly the incoming new employees in terms of their skills and competencies. And they also wanted to capture the knowledge base, because if, suppose, say, a senior staff leaves the company, then, the knowledge gets lost. So they wanted to, make sure that that knowledge base stays also within its tacit knowledge within the organization. So, so obviously, the first step would be for them to actually to look at, in terms of crafting a framework. So unfortunately, I don't have it here with me to be able to show you a sample of how that works. But some of the things they needed to look at would be, because at that point of time, they had absolutely nobody looking at it, and they didn't want to employ any people from the outside, because that would mean, a lot more of expenditure. So they had they brought in, they designated 2 of the staff, 0.2 FTEs of their time would now be dedicated towards L&D role. So these people became the coordinator. So that was the first step, is to identify who could lead, and then they developed for literally each staff, because they only had 9 staff with them. So, for each staff, what would be the desired competencies in that role for them to excel in that role? What is it that would be expected of them? And then looked at a duration of a program. They came out with a 6-month program. And part of that was, for example, the junior staff tagging along with the senior staff on a few projects. And then after that, giving opportunities for a newer staff after that to actually go out and demonstrate that they have learned those skills under the supervision of the senior staff. So that was part of the learning journey, as they called it. And then they also embedded in their framework a certain amount of time. So out of 40 hours, I think in a week or maybe fortnightly, I can't now remember, like 5 hours was dedicated for L&D, for their own professional development. So this would be the time when they would get together in the classrooms. They would have, what would be covered in the classrooms could vary really depending on what's the need. It could be somebody coming in and teaching some content, some skills, or it could be they looking at other case studies, which, as I mentioned, they would not have the experience of going out all the time and experiencing something new. So, having cases would mean that, they could work on those cases in the classroom as if though they are actually on the job solving a problem, because, they were an engineering consulting company. And then obviously the two senior staff who were appointed, point two, their task was actually to write up the cases, because they knew a lot more of the case of the work that they've done before. So they wrote up the cases, and then part of the framework was how do you encompass it. So they had something, they got together a knowledge repository platform, online platform, and then they uploaded all the cases, and then they also had some time for staff in terms of their own self-paced learning beyond the classroom. How many hours, a couple of hours was given to them. So these details were all written up. They wrote a very detailed framework, but as I said, you don't have to write a very, very detailed one like this, but it's basically a plan of what is it that you expect them to achieve at the end of the program, and how are you going to go about doing it, and who would be in charge, and how would you measure it, and things like that.
Fantastic. Hey, well, it's great to know that there's these examples of where learning and development, the evaluation after has really made a difference. Look, we really appreciate your time, Kumar. This is an important area for businesses, if they want to do well and do well by their people. So we really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, Simon.